why are some people still not getting it 5 years into Bitcoin Beach's success and being surrounded by Bitcoin stickers and Bitcoin logos and hodlers and Bitcoiners visiting? Why are they still not thinking, I can save this as well? So welcome, Mike, to your own studio, to your own podcasting house, to your own sound engineer. How are you doing today?
Awesome. It's great to have you here in El Salvador again.
Nice.
It's been a little while.
Yeah, too long actually. I need to come back here more regularly because also I don't appreciate how good the waves are here.
Yeah.
I was in the water today. I've cut my knees as usual because, as per, you wipe out here and you smash the bottom and that's it.
Well, you're so tall, it's probably harder for you. Like I don't usually hit the bottom, so you got the lanky legs.
One wave generally was like sat on the rocks. And I was like, okay, yeah. It was a little bit lower tide today, and I was like, you're just working it out.
Yeah.
But no, it's a special place, and I mean, I tweeted this morning as well that I've only used Bitcoin once here, and it was at a laundry place. And then my homestay host, who does accept Bitcoin, was like, I know we accept Bitcoin, but please can you pay me in cash because I need the cash. And I was like, oh, well, that means I've got to go to the ATM, which is at this brand new Bitcoin hardware store, another amazing addition. And I walked in there, went to use the ATM, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to use the ATM. And then these two motorcyclists were like, oh, no, we're doing a peer-to-peer trades. Let's do it. And I was like, okay, they were from like Germany or something.
Yeah.
And so, there's this real interesting energy.
So you've only used Bitcoin once?
Well, I haven't used it yet because I'm about to pick up my laundry this morning. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But how long have you been here?
3 days.
In Zonte?
Yeah.
And you haven't been spending Bitcoin?
No, sorry. I've the other way around.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm going
to have a sip of coffee. Sorry. Weird intro rug pull. Sorry, I've used Bitcoin. Sorry, I've not. Yeah, why can't I speak? I've only used fiat once, and I haven't even used it yet.
Okay, that's better.
Yeah.
You were starting to worry me there.
Yeah. And then the homestay person as well, because I had to do this peer-to-peer trade and gave her the dollars. She was like, can I give you the change? Because it was a $100 bill. She was, can I give you the change in Bitcoin? So I was like, oh, okay, well, this is clearly, she wants the Bitcoin. It's just that it's impossible to live 100% fiat free all the time because it's knackering and tiring, whatever. So before we get into this, like, what was it that first drew you to El Zonte, 20 years ago, and why is your life now here?
Yeah. So came to El Salvador on a surf trip. It was kind of not really planned that much. It was the cheapest tickets in Central America, and I hadn't been to El Salvador before. So I was like, I heard there's good surf. So we just, a buddy of mine from university, we came down it was supposed to be 2 weeks, and it was kind of a funny story. He got a call halfway through. He's a doctor. And he was involved with a group that does like medical missions trips in different parts of the world. And they had their doctor fall out for the trip to Guatemala. And so they're going to have to cancel it. So they're like, hey, is there any chance you can cut your trip short and go? And so we talked about it. We're like, yeah, sure. We had already gotten a week of just amazing surfing. And so it was... So we went to Guatemala, but it was somehow the lines got crossed, and he had said, hey, I'm here with my buddy Mike. Maybe he can help a little bit. He knows some Spanish. Mm-hmm. And that became, I'm bringing a translator also with me who will be the translator. So I show up, and they're like, oh, sweet, our translator's here. And I was like, you're joking, right? And they're like, no, Ian said you were going to be our translator. Oh. So I spent the trip being the translator for a doctor, for another doctor, and then we were working in these communities where they didn't even speak Spanish. They spoke different like Mayan languages. Oh. And so they would speak to one person who would then translate into Spanish, who would speak to me. And this was before we were living here. So it was my high school Spanish. And so I was the medical translator. So that was very interesting.
Wow.
Medical. Yeah. We didn't kill anybody. So
you're not? Yeah. No. Okay. Zero body count. That's good. Yeah.
Yes.
So how did that lead to you eventually putting down roots here?
So just had such an amazing time. I mean, you've been here. Like once you're
here,
it's like, wow, this is a special place. Yeah. The people just so warm and inviting. Mm-hmm. I've traveled, like you, I've traveled extensively throughout the world. And, a lot of places, either people are kind of cold and like unfriendly, or they're like, they want to be your best friend because they want something out of you. And you every time you go someplace, people are going to be like trying to sell you things. And, and both of those get kind of wearing.
Yeah.
Where in El Salvador, I felt like it was like if you chose to engage with the people, they would, be warm and helpful and, help you with directions or anything. Even if your Spanish wasn't great, they're very patient. But also, they're not like trying to sell you stuff all the time. You're not getting bombarded. It's just kind of, you just want to do your own thing. if you're an introvert like I am, you can kind of just be left alone. And so it had that like cool balance.
Yeah. No, it's a special kind of culture here, isn't it? And it's funny that you mentioned those, colder countries, and I immediately was like, oh yeah, that was like when I was living in Serbia. And then when you're like the warmer countries, I was like, oh yeah, that's when I was living in Morocco.
Yes.
Like someone, and I have Moroccan friends, I have Serbian friends, and it's one of those things where, once you unlock a Serbian, you're friends for life.
Yeah.
Once you're, with a Moroccan and you get to know their family and stuff, you're also friends for life. But it's that initial touch point, right? That what is a tourist or a foreigner's face to me in El Salvador is just, it's like any other face. I'm going to be friendly to them. I'm going to be welcoming to them, and that's kind of special. But within
they don't see you as a meal ticket, but they also aren't like annoyed that you're here, and they're not suspicious of you. It's just kind of this like
But that sort of this is a question for later on. I'm going to ask it now. So, to what extent has sort of the Bitcoin culture changed not El Salvador, but El Zonte's culture? Because there are more and more Bitcoiners moving here. Even just walking around, I know it's post-conference because we just had the Plan B thing. Yeah. But you can't move without there being another Bitcoiner saying, hi, what's up? And so it does feel like there's a revolving door of Bitcoiners either buying property here, moving here, traveling here, doing what I'm doing, sort of investigating here, that kind of thing. So has that changed the culture of El Zonte in particular?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's had an impact. Anytime you have any type of foreign, group that moves into a place, there's going to have impact. I think one of the most positive ways I've seen it has been El Zonte specifically, and El Salvador in general has gone from a spending nation and moved, along the continuum to being a saving nation and a nation that kind of thinks about the future and kind of lowered their time preference. So I think as we've seen Bitcoiners come in and, just kind of share their philosophies on things, but also as the locals start to use Bitcoin, they start to think about the value of money for the first time and what it really is, that it's their stored time and energy, and the opportunity cost of spending it now versus in the future. And also just the fact that things are growing here and everybody thinks that, there's going to be more opportunity a year from now than there is now. It makes people want to invest in businesses and do those sorts of things. So it really has shifted from this, like, just live for the day. And, even in that, a lot of them weren't that vested in the community because their goal was to get out and go to the U.S. illegally a lot of times. And so it's hard to be kind of civic and community minded when you're planning on leaving, where now we've seen that kind of shift as people plan on really living here in the community. And I think also the fact that people from around the world are moving here makes them feel fortunate to be here because, when you're in a place where everybody's trying to leave, you feel like, oh, this is a horrible place. But when you're in a place where, Americans, Canadians, Europeans, Australians are all kind of converging on, you feel like, wow, like, no, actually, I live in the place that all these other people that supposedly from the first world want to move to. And so, that's not to negate the fact that people coming from the first world have first world salaries and have more opportunity a lot of times to take advantage of things here. And so that's not to say that there's, a completely equal playing field now, but it at least has transformed the mindset from this is a place I need to get out of to this is a place where I should try to build my future.
Yeah, no, I mean, you do sense that as well, but then I've also had some interactions with locals, and I'm always really quick to watch where someone accepts with Blink Wallet. Obviously, Blink is like the Bitcoin Beach wallet, and it's brilliant because it works 1,000 or maybe 1,000,000 times better than Chivo does.
Yes.
And
I mean, that's a low bar, so.
True, very true. We can definitely get into that. But with Blink, of course, you can accept in stable sats, and I noticed that quite a few merchants do accept in stable sats. And then, I'm always just asking questions and trying to work out what's going on. And a lot of the merchants as well, I was like, so are you hodling any of the money you save? And there was one cafe yesterday, I forget what it's called, like Pollo or something. It's really, really close to Hope House. She was like, yeah, I try to save as much as I can. And I was like, oh, interesting. And then how do you cash out? Where do you cash out? And she was like, I go to El Tunco for the ATM there. And I was like, no, but there's an ATM in the hardware store. She didn't actually know that yet. So,
okay. Yeah. I think that's new.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. But then a guy yesterday who's up the street a bit, he was saying, no, I don't save and I convert it straight to dollars. And I was like, I'm not going to just tell you. You should be hodling, bro. But it's been 5 years. Why are they not hodling now? Like these specific examples I mentioned. I know that I've also had some great conversations where some people are hodling. Yeah. But why are some people still not getting it 5 years into Bitcoin Beach's success and being surrounded by Bitcoin stickers and Bitcoin logos and hodlers and Bitcoiners visiting? Why are they still not thinking, I can save this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same way that, why are people in the U.S. who've been exposed to this and had all this opportunity even way before El Salvadorans were exposed to it, they still have a hard time wrapping their mind around it. So it's not everybody's going to get it, especially initially, until it becomes just the default. And so I think we're on the path for that. Usually it takes people, I've found it takes them at least one cycle. And so a lot of the people now are ones that got into Bitcoin as it was going into the bear market. And so I think there's still some of those like negative assumptions about what the price is going to do. I think once we go through this cycle, they'll kind of see, okay, this is something that, it's volatile up and down, but over the long run, it appreciates in price. And so what we've seen is generally people who have been accepting it for longer move towards actually holding it in Bitcoin.
Okay. And you've seen that personally with, I mean, I know from your immediate community, Roman's a big success story. There's plenty of other Salvadoran success stories. I mean, I've been spending some time with BitDriver and his drivers. Yeah. And it's just amazing what Napo needs a documentary made about him yesterday. It's so cool. He's now got 21 drivers. All of them are accepting Bitcoin. They all get it. They've all put the work in to understand what a private key is and a public key and all this kind of stuff. But to your point about some people won't get it, I think that's something that the Bitcoin community at large doesn't really understand. And I just think we should stress that some more. Here we are in Bitcoin Beach, El Zonte, and some people don't get it and they won't get it and they might not get it in 10 years, And
some people are just not wired to really think about money and finances. I mean, I'll use my wife as an example. She uses Bitcoin all the time, but it's not something that she would naturally do other than because she's married to me. It's not her focus in life. I mean, prior to Bitcoin, I've always been very into investing and very focused on that. And for her, it's not, I mean, she's obviously very intelligent, it has nothing to do with that. That's not what's important to her, where my mind's very wired to think about finances, to think about the financial implications of everything. And so I think there's just naturally going to be individuals that kind of gravitate towards that, and others that it's just not something they think about. I think in the long run they'll use it because it'll be the best tool. It'll be just what works. Yeah. And just like there was some people that it took longer to start using the internet, and it's the ones who use it now. It's just because it works, and it's not because they are really into it and that's their passion. It's just you use the internet because it works.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. No. I mean, my girlfriend's the same. She gets Bitcoin. She's orange pilled. But she's also not obsessing over it the way that I am and trying to work out what's going to break it, what's going to kill it, what are the keys to unlocking, all this adoption stuff. We will get onto the IMF stuff and then also some Tether stuff later on. But I want to just focus a little bit more on Bitcoin Beach. Are there some misconceptions or things that people come to Bitcoin Beach in there, they have already, these preconceived ideas that you would like to either right or right the wrongs of, or would you like to just sort of highlight?
It's so across the board. Okay. And so yeah, what I found is there can be people in the same group, with the same experience. And you can have one person who's super disappointed, man, I thought everybody would take Bitcoin here. I still saw people using dollars. They have this perception that, dollars have been banished and, they're burning them in the streets and it's only Bitcoin. And then you have other people that are just shocked that wow, I thought I'd be able to use it at one or two places, but I didn't know that I would be able to just live on Bitcoin while I was here. And there would be the vast majority of the places would, even when you ask, it was just second nature. They're oh yeah, here, pay to this. And so
that's true. That is so nice. They're not flinching when you say, can I pay in Bitcoin? They just go, see, and they go they get the thing, they come over and they pay. And it's just the same as, can I pay with card? They get the thing, they come over and you pay. And, the first couple of times it wears off. After the first couple of times it wears off, but then it's still you should highlight that it's really cool.
Oh yeah. And but to them it's just normal part of life. It's because it's become so common here. Mm-hmm. So I really think that it depends on what people's preconceived notions of it. And I've found, ironically, it seems like people who've been in Bitcoin for a long time, they're the ones that are most positively surprised. And I think because they've gone through just the arc and know how hard it has been to use historically anywhere. So the more OGs are like, wow, this is actually really happening. The people that have been in Bitcoin for maybe a year or two and are, still very ideological, like they haven't seen the struggles of just getting basic adoption and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're like, oh, I just assumed that like everywhere in El Salvador would be able to use it. And so I think too, a lot of times people underestimate how long these shifts take. And so, I always tell people this is like a decade-long transformation. Now, obviously, in El Zonte, we're way ahead of schedule because we had, we had that kind of critical mass. You have that network effect. It's the vast majority of businesses in El Zonte accept Bitcoin. Whether they are ideologically aligned or not, it's just like a practical thing. If you don't accept Bitcoin, you're going to lose out on a lot of business. And So, and then we've seen that kind of ripple out from here. And so you have, like, as you get a little bit out further the surrounding communities, there's still a lot more adoption than there would be if you, get like 50 miles out.
Okay.
And so what we've seen it, happen here and kind of ripple out. And then Berlin is something that's newer, and I think it'll ripple out from there. There's our project in Punta Mango, La Paraya. And so you have all these kind of little circular economies that are rippling out from there. And our goal in the next year is to make sure there's in every department, which I think it's 14 departments there's in El Salvador. Is it 14, Paco? 14. Yeah. So nice. 14 departments. So our goal is to have at least one circular economy in every department in El Salvador to make sure that they have those touch points to kind of ripple out. So that's huge. And then just the fact that like Super Selectos is the main grocery store chain in El Salvador. Almost any decent sized town has a Super Selectos, and you can pay in Bitcoin at any of those. So that's
integrated into the POS. Paco was telling me this morning.
Yeah. And at first when they were doing it, it was like painful to use, and it was but now it's like, unless it's their first time, they're newer, but generally they don't, they don't even blink. It's like, oh yeah, and they just and you just pay. And so
but that's because someone in upper management at Super Selectos has said, we need to integrate this thing. We're going to do it with this Bitcoin company, and we're going to train all our staff on how to accept payments by card and by Bitcoin. So there's someone in that system, in that company rather, who's been like, yeah, we need to do this. Whereas if you go to other places, and also just one thing on Super Selectos. So I was there buying groceries on the first day I was in El Salvador a week ago, and then I also went to the phone bit to top up my Tigo SIM card because I did a workaround to get a SIM card. I basically have a Salvadoran SIM without KYCing, and I went into the Super Selectos top up for phones thing, and I said, can I pay in Bitcoin? They're like, no, you can't pay in Bitcoin here. I was like, okay, this is another like classic example of where the tills over there are all Bitcoinified. It's all good, whereas this place, which is 2 meters from the tills, they don't accept it for whatever reason. So there's always these, and then the same thing with Wendy's. Like I played at one Wendy's. I'd never been to a Wendy's before, and I'm a Brit, so I was like, the memes about Wendy's. Yeah. I wanted to go check one out. And the first one I went to, they accepted Bitcoin easily. The second one I went to was a drive-through, and they didn't accept Bitcoin because they didn't have the authorization, whatever that means. Same thing with a Denny's. Denny's, I went in the first one, and I was like, can I pay in Bitcoin? They're like, can you pay in dollars? We'd rather you pay in dollars. And I was like, sorry, don't have dollars. Not from the US, don't have dollars. It has to be Bitcoin. They're like, okay. They go all around their houses, and eventually they get the right guy who's like the Bitcoin guy, and they paid it to his wallet. So I think they did a peer-to-peer.
Really?
Yeah, it was like his Blink wallet. And I was like, okay. But, they worked it out.
Yeah.
But there's all these sort of weird inaccuracies and differences and inconsistencies in how businesses adopt it. So, you give the Super Selectos example, which is great. But why do they not do the bloody phone thing as well? Like, what's going on there?
Well, yeah, and that's part of just Salvadoran, the way business things are structured. There's everything's very compartmentalized. And even when you're paying in cash, sometimes you're like, no, you can't pay for that there. You have to go over here. And you have to have receipts in triplicate. And then this guy will check your receipt and actually give you your product. And so part of that is just the bureaucratic ways that they do things in El Salvador. And so sometimes when you add another payment method, it kind of complicates it. You could have topped up your thing with Bitrefill.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so that would have been a way you could have paid with Bitcoin.
And there are adverts all over the country, and I didn't even think.
Yeah.
I used to work with BitRefill, of God's sake. Oops.
So there's always, like I said, we're still in a place where sometimes it's a little more work, but you can definitely 100% live on Bitcoin only in El Salvador. Now, that means you're going to be somewhat limited in sometimes and where you go and which restaurants, and like you said, some you'll find that they take it, and sometimes that's because of the management there is, other places they just don't want to bother it. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it depends too on how much Bitcoiners are actually spending their Bitcoin, because if they don't have people coming in and spending Bitcoin, then the machine they use doesn't get charged or it goes dead or they forget how to do it. And so that's why we always are pushing Bitcoiners like, hey, when you come to El Salvador, like pay in Bitcoin. It's that spreads, and even like the super selectos, like on the coast and near here, it's much easier to use Bitcoin than if you go to another part of the country where they don't have that many people using Bitcoin. And so it does make a big difference in when people come here that they live on a Bitcoin standard. Okay.
What's mobile network coverage like? Because last time I was here, there was a couple of moments where I couldn't pay in Bitcoin at all because there was literally no data coverage. It was mostly around Santa Ana, around that sort of part. Is the whole country now properly covered in like at least 3G?
Yeah, pretty much anywhere you have coverage. I mean, it might not be on the particular carrier that you have, and so that's one kind of limitation. When people are coming from other countries, a lot of times if they're using their plan from the U.S. or Europe, a lot of times they'll access the different networks, and they'll at least, it might be a little slow, but at least enough to make a payment. Okay. But if you've gotten a local SIM card, you may be like in a dead spot for that particular carrier, but there'll be another carrier that works. So sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge.
Okay. I'm wondering if we should go now to talk about like gentrification, real estate stuff in El Zonte, or we'd go straight to the IMF stuff. What do you fancy?
You're in charge here. This isn't my podcast.
It's your studio. I feel I'm slightly on your podcast here, Mike. Okay. So these are stats from Alfaro, okay? Yes. And Alfaro, for people listening, is the like government critical. They actually left the country, didn't they? The headquarters left the country. No, is that right?
I think maybe. I don't know. I mean, they still the main guy who wrote this story. I believe he's still in El Salvador. I believe. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, so you know some of these guys personally?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, pinch of salt, because there were a couple of things when I read through one. I've read quite a lot of their articles, because it's always good to see what like the critics are saying about El Salvador.
Yes.
But because I'm very like ingratiated with the Bitcoin movement or like the Bitcoin community, I'm also aware of a lot of inaccuracies in their reporting. And so, like in this piece in particular, I was like, they don't know the full story. They don't, or they're painting it in a certain light. And there's certain things I don't want to say publicly, but I'm like, they haven't actually drawn the dots here. No.
Like I said before we started, like I want you to go hard, and nothing's off limits. So let's dive into it.
Sweet. So they report that the average price of land per square meter in El Zonte between 2015 and 2020 was $34, and it's now at $80.61. And then Chimbera was sat here a month ago talking about, is there a real estate bubble in El Zonte? He compared it to Malibu in California, the US. So it's obviously. And walking around, you see the change. It's very hard to miss. There are construction projects on every street. There is drilling from 7 a.m. until 5 p.m. There are huge trucks going past. You're at Mama Rosa's Pupuseria, which is the sort of poster child for pupusa and Bitcoin adoption in El Zonte. She's a lovely.
The original.
Lady. Yeah, she's great. I had a long chat with her. She kind of remembered me, but I was asking her, like, do these trucks bother you? She was like, no, it's fine. I was like, okay, and I was just sort of trying to get to know. Does all this construction, and where it's going, because it's foreign money coming in. You said it yourself, like, is there an equal playing field now? And what does this all lead to? Does this lead to El Zonte becoming this holiday Bitcoiner paradise, and there's locals that move further and further up the hill and then eventually into the mountain because they're priced out? Is there an element of gentrification going on here? How bad is it? How bad could it get? Or maybe this is all wrong, and maybe this is the best thing ever. Maybe it's great that El Salvadorans are able to sell their properties and upgrade their lives and, do other things. And also there's now roads in El Zonte. I'm rambling a bit here, but basically, given these increases in property values and the general sort of increase in prices across El Zonte, does this pose a challenge for the local community, or is it a benefit to the local community?
I mean, like anything, it's nuanced. It's both. So I'll kind of go through the different things. So you were mentioning the noise and the construction and the trucks. Like, for most Salvadorans, that does not bother them at all.
Yeah.
It bothers me. I hate that. And it bothers a lot of the foreigners. And so what you have kind of different camps of people and their different views on whether this is good or not.
Okay.
So one of the camps that has the most kind of negativity in it, well, there's two that I'll bring up, but the first one would be foreigners who have been coming to El Zonte for a long time. And for them, it was kind of their like low cost paradise. And so for them, they're kind of annoyed that, there's construction stuff going on, that the costs have gone up. A lot of them would just go back to the US or Canada or something, work for, a few months a year and then be able to come back here and live. And so it's interesting watching them, but that's because they never had to earn a living here. So they weren't, their life wasn't predicated by like the salaries that were being paid here. So for them, it's seen as a negative. And I think they're missing the bigger picture of all the job opportunities. And yes, wages have gone up, things have got more expensive, but that means that the locals are benefiting from that. So I remember being in one meeting and a girl I know who's quite lovely, but I remember her saying in the meeting, like, I didn't sign up for this. And it was like,
what did she sign up to?
You're a guest here in somebody else's country. So I think kind of just people sometimes lose like a frame of reference that it's not about you, it's about the whole community.
Right.
And so yes, it may be annoying to you, but look at all these people that are working now, all the business opportunities. It used to be that people were given surf lessons. It was like, they'd make like $5. Now they're making $25, $30. They can actually accumulate some capital and actually do something with their life. So I think you have to kind of take who is saying that. The other people that are kind of annoyed are like the upper middle class Salvadorans, or the upper class, like the kids of the upper class that not really done much with their own life, but are living on their parents' money and were used to coming down to El Zonte and being able to get the nicest rooms and the different things that now they're kind of priced out. And so I think they kind of are annoyed that like, this was their holiday spot and now it's been, people are willing to pay more than they're willing to pay to be there. So you see those are kind of the biggest negatives that I would like discount and say like, that's not really, I'm not super concerned about what those people think.
Yeah, it's their secret. It's out the box.
It's it's like a lot of places. People are like, oh, I found paradise, and I want to keep everybody else out of it and keep the prices low. And so, the unique thing, and when people talk about gentrification in El Zonte, I think it's important to understand that most locals who like live that would call themselves Zonteños, like, they didn't own the prime properties in the beach. There's very few that lived on this side of the highway. Historically, almost all of the properties were owned by wealthy Salvadorans.
Yeah.
And so the gentrification that's happened, to the degree that's happened, has been more foreigners buying properties from wealthy Salvadorans. And a lot of them were properties that have been dilapidated, that they stopped coming to El Zonte, when the gang things got really bad. And so for them, they're just, they're thrilled to be able to sell their properties for way more than they ever thought that they'd be able to sell them for. And so that aspect, you don't really have the place where you have foreigners buying. They're not really pushing out locals.
Yeah, okay.
Where you do see locals impacted is a lot of these properties, because they were kind of abandoned. You had people kind of squatting on the properties and, building shacks on the properties and living for, a lot of them for decades. Mm-hmm. And so you have now a lot of those original owners coming back and reclaiming their properties.
No way. And thus evicting these squatters.
And thus evicting these people. And sometimes they will pay them and give them a little bit of money to move out. Other ones will come in with a different attitude, and they'll try to bring the police and push them out. So you do have that aspect where there has been families displaced because of that.
Yeah.
But it's, is that that's a negative in that sense, but it's a positive in that, like, now people actually want these properties, where before, nobody wanted to come here because it was dangerous. And so now people are coming back.
Okay.
You're seeing improvements happen. So the story I think that you were referring to, that Alfaro mentions, that they say that there was a project, the government called it like the Bitcoin Beach Initiative. It had nothing to do with us, but they were going to do a big project on the street where Hope House is, and that area. And across from Hope House, there's a couple big lots that were in that kind of situation, that the owners hadn't been around for a long time, and a number of locals had moved and were living there.
Right.
And so we saw actually the owners of the property a few years ago come back. They started like doing surveying. They were looking to do projects, like a hotel or something there. And so their plans were to kick all of these people out. The government came in and said, hey, we want to do something here. We want to do development. We want to showcase what's happening here. And so we had said, hey, that's very important that these people that live here are getting included. And so initially, when it was presented that, they were going to buy the property from the owners and use eminent domain if needed, if the owners didn't want to willingly sell, and keep the locals living on that property. We'd kind of push them, hey, let's make sure we can accommodate and keep them on this property. As they kind of went through the process, they're like, okay, there's not a way for us to actually allow them to live on the property, because this is going to be, government public land. So what we'll do is, because a lot of them had little businesses, is we will have business, we'll build like nice little shops and stuff that they can occupy for their business, but they won't be able to live here. And they coordinated with another housing project that we've been involved with New Story, that's doing housing in El Zonte. It's probably like a kilometer inland, in the kind of by the Colonia, which is where most of the local people live. And so Coinbase actually had donated $3 million to this project, and it's been going on for a few years. It's had some snags like any of these projects, but you can go back there and see the houses being developed. So they chose these families and said, hey, we will, while most of the families we're going to have to pay a fraction of the cost, because it's always good for people to have skin in the game and not just be given stuff for free. So, the houses were probably worth, $40,000 or $50,000. They were going to have to pay like $10,000,
Okay.
I think with zero interest loans. But for the families that were moving from this place, they were going to give them theirs. So it was like, hey, you're going to be displaced from there, but we'll give you. Well, they didn't want to move. They're like, no, we're used to being at the beach and we want to stay here. And so you can understand that, but also I don't think they realize that probably in the end, they're going to be left with nothing, because if the government doesn't do this project, the owners are going to come back and they're going to evict them. Yeah. And so they're not going to have their shop and their business there. They're not going to have the home that they would have had full title to inland. And so it was kind of one of these things, like you understand that they don't want to change their life, but you also know you're like, in the long run, you're going to be much worse off. And so the government was trying to help them, but then you had, I don't think it was Alfaro who wrote the original article, but it was another kind of one of these like very left-leaning came in and wrote this like tearjerker story about how the locals are being kicked out because of the gentrification and Bitcoin Beach, and that it was just for foreigners. And it was like, no, that's not really the real story. So it's a lot of things like that where anytime there's progress, anytime there's development, there's going to be changes. There's going to be people that are negatively impacted and positively impacted. Like for these particular families, life has gotten much better in that they can now go on the streets at night. Their businesses are thriving. They have all these opportunities, but there's a road. There's paved road. There's utilities in there. So, but also like, because they are squatting on land that's not theirs, and the owners now see this land as valuable, they can now be susceptible to being removed. So if this had remained a horrible place, they probably could have stayed on that land because nobody would have wanted it. So it's one of those things that it's like. Yeah. So when they write these articles and talk about, the government's coming in and treating the locals badly, it's like, no, that's not the story. They're trying to do the right thing, but things are complicated. If you're going to have public spaces, you can't have people have title to those properties at the same time. And
because it was that story. Then there's another story which is also about Surf City generally, and Surf City is sort of this entire coastline from, is it up to kilometer 41 down to what, La Libertad, or how far does it go?
I think so. It starts in La Libertad. I think it goes to Mizata.
Okay,
which is
just this whole sort of like 50 miles of coastline or something. And there's these brand new bus stops that are there. There's a bus linking it all. And there's these new stairs down to the beaches, and there's paved roads and things, and it's looking more and more sort of sparkling and shiny. And yet within this, there's also new developments being built, and it's the same story you describe. And they described one that was in just outside La Libertad, where they were evicting some locals, and they were saying that they weren't squatting, but you're seeing echoes of this across Surf City.
So there are like property owners who they use eminent domain because they're expanding the road, and so. Right. There are some people who had at least part of their property impacted, even in El Zonte. Mm-hmm. A lot of them were businesses that just had temporary permission to use like the side of the road, but they've been operating for 20 years, and this will displace them as they put the road in. But it's one of those things that, roads and connections bring prosperity to an area, bring opportunity. But yes, if somebody has been operating on the side of the road, they're going to be displaced during that. And that's not to minimize the impact that has on them, but also knowing that it's going to positively benefit a lot of other families.
I think, there's a lot left out of those stories. Yeah. And ultimately, this isn't some Chinese Communist Party utilitarian regime whereby we are going to build a road through your house, whether you like it or not. This is like quite a considered affair. And I think that, a lot of them are missing. But there was
so even in that, I think the government kind of put the brakes on the initial project we were talking about. And so we'll see in the long run. Are those families better off? Or are they worse off? Are the owners going to come and kick them out and they're going to be left with nothing? But the government was like, hey, we were trying to help you guys. And then we're getting all this like negative, pushback. And so it's like, we'll go focus somewhere else. So I don't feel like it's been like them coming in and just like bulldozing over people and not, being sensitive to what public sentiment is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it just makes me not want to go into politics whatsoever. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yes,
it is. The no good deed goes unpunished.
There you go. So the title of the other El Faro story was like, "Welcome to the new owners of Bitcoin Beach," or the new owners of El Zonte as Bitcoiners. And
do you know I'm the owner of El Zonte?
Well, that was the thing that was the way it literally portrayed you. And it was like listing, the portfolio values of things, and like we're in the studio to your house, and it was saying that like your portfolio was like 1 million. I was like, I think it's probably a bit north of that.
Well, that was what was funny, because some of their figures were like so often dated that they were.
So wrong. I'm sorry, but like a beachfront, because even Chimbera said during the podcast, like an oceanfront, or maybe it was Lexi, said, Chimbera and Lexi run Good Life El Salvador, which is a real estate business focusing on El Salvador, but mostly El Zonte, right? And they said, an oceanfront place now in El Zonte will be $1 million. Yeah. And they were saying that your portfolio value will be $1 million. I'm like, you have an oceanfront property and there's other properties you have. Yeah. I'm sure it's a lot more than $1 million. So a lot of it is like, I like that they're trying to do good journalism, but they're just falling flat when it comes to actually the specifics. But the point was, and I think we can entertain this idea, like, do you worry that El Zonte becomes more of a Bitcoin tourist hub than a genuine, sustainable Bitcoin circular economy?
Yeah, I think that, like I said, this goes back to understanding how El Zonte has always been structured. Like, this has always been a getaway for the wealthy. Prior, it was for wealthy Salvadorans. Now it's more Bitcoiners. And you ask any local who they would prefer to be the caretaker for, 90% of them are going to say they would rather for a foreigner, because they tend to pay better, they tend to treat them better. And so I think for the general populace, like, they have benefited. Like I said, there's some people that are annoyed. This was kind of their playground before, and now they feel priced out. And so, but I think actually you have more money staying in the community, as you have, especially within the circular Bitcoin economy. You have stuff flowing. You have local businesses that are coming in and offering surf lessons. It used to just be the hotels, which were, oftentimes not owned by people locally from here. They were from San Salvador or other places. Now you have people giving surf lessons that are from El Zonte. They
Yeah.
develop their own brand, their own businesses. And so I think you actually have more funds flowing into people that are from El Zonte. You know, that's not to minimize that housing is an issue in El Salvador, like it is everywhere in the world. Like housing is expensive, and people with the average salaries have a very hard time affording. That's why historically the majority of people actually were squatters, the locals that live here, or caretakers, or some very few own the land. And those that did, it was usually because they had family members in the U.S. that had sent money that made it, you know, available. And that's a whole nother thing that has impacted the economy. Like the prices in El Salvador are high on real estate because of how many Salvadorans are living in the U.S. and sending money back. So that influences what people are able to pay for property, especially in a small, densely populated country like El Salvador. So
that didn't also have historically a lot of construction because people didn't see that future, and now people are seeing that
exactly.
future. Construction is going crazy. And that's I mean, there's such an interesting picture or like fabric that's being sort of woven here in El Salvador. But the sort of secondary question to that is, do you think, like, you managed you oversaw a circular economy here, you oversee a series of circular economies around the world and help support them. Do you think that one of the best ways to unlock circular economy sustainability is through real estate?
I think to have a community that is sustainable, you need a way to bring Bitcoin into that community.
Right.
And so tourism is one of the easiest ways. Now, not every community is that going to work. There's some communities, like some of the ones that you
Berlin,
visited in Peru.
Oh, yeah.
That it's never going to become a tourist destination.
Absolutely not, yeah. I say that with affection. Like, great towns, but it's, my God,
you're never going to talk people into going there.
No.
So those communities will have to find different ways to bring. And there's other ways, you know, you can work, you know, teach people the skills so they can work online and get paid in Bitcoin and bring it in. You can manufacture and sell in Bitcoin. There's other ways to bring Bitcoin in, but tourism is one of the most natural and the easiest. And then getting Bitcoiners to actually move and live in the community keeps that Bitcoin injection be an ongoing thing. And so that's one of the reasons it's been so sustainable, and why all the businesses in El Zonte, or the majority of them, accept Bitcoin, is because you have so many Bitcoiners now living here that all they do is spend Bitcoin. So yes, I think real estate plays an important role. Also, when you're buying, especially as a foreigner, but even as a Salvadoran, when you do the transactions in Bitcoin, it just makes them so much easier from like a logistical point of view. And so I think that's another reason that it makes it much easier to get funds from outside the country into the country. You don't have, I mean, the people who try to buy and have to do wires, I mean, it's a nightmare, and you have things get held up and blocked, and there's all kinds of horror stories. And so I think historically that's kept people from actually making purchases here, where now it's very easy. Going back to one of the other things, talking about whether we're seeing kind of this gentrification. You know, we've been very focused from the beginning to make sure that this is something that benefits the local community and push as much as we can. Obviously, we don't control everything. And so one of the things was the housing project that they're doing out there in the colony, was making sure that, okay, this is a way for, so I think it's going to wind up being 160 homes that are built as part of this, that they'll have full title to. They'll pay a portion of what the market cost will be. They actually make their payments in Bitcoin, like, so they're paying their mortgage, and it's denominated in dollars, but the payments are made in Bitcoin. So, you know, the longer it goes, the better off they are. Yeah. Well,
don't want to rug them in 10 years.
Yeah. we want to move in that direction, but in this case, you're like, you know, I wouldn't want to take a loan that was denominated in Bitcoin, because obviously you think that
I didn't want to pay the deposit on my surfboard in Bitcoin. I was that bad. Like a $50 deposit. He was like, oh, you can pay the deposit in Bitcoin. I was like, I don't think I want to. I did obviously. But I was like, you know, that could be 56 euros when he returns to it, or it could be 42, which is so stupid. But it's. So I think, you know, I think people need to look at the big picture of what's going on here, and I would say overall, like, hands down, the local community is benefiting. You're always going to have your naysayers. You're going to have your people that, regardless of what you do, like, you know, I had
people come after me and like, you're not helping the community. You haven't built a hospital here. I was like, what? I never said
that's their purity test.
I never said I was going to build a hospital
but
here.
You were a Spanish medical translator for years.
Yes,
Mike.
that is true. That is true. But you're like, where do you jump to that? Like, we're this small little team doing this grassroots project, and I think, considering that, it's amazing the impact and transformation. But we're not coming in and building hospitals, and that's we don't have USAID money. So so it's I think it's just all the perspective, and you're always gonna have people that are just naysayers regardless, and those are always the loudest people. And so if you just go by the people that like speak out, you would think like, oh, there's a lot of people upset. But then when you look at like percentage wise, it's like a very small percentage. So even that Alfaro story, I was just kind of curious after they wrote that, like, because I knew they would post, and they pushed so hard on they did. I mean, they did so many different editions and like reels, and they were really trying to make it a thing. It was a
big investment. And the graphics are high quality.
Oh man, and it just never got much traction, which I was kind of surprised because they put a lot of effort into it. But I even went to their Facebook page and kind of like read the comments, and the vast majority of the comments were like, "You guys are idiots! Like, this is great. People want to come into our country now." And
really, even on
which
Facebook?
I was surprised, because
usually not a source of signal.
Usually when you post something like that, everybody jumps in. Oh, the colonizers are coming in; they're pushing people out. And these were coming from Salvadorans. The majority of them were like, "You guys are idiots! Like, this is great that people want to invest." You had the occasional like, "Yeah, we're getting priced out," but the vast majority of them were actually like anti Alfaro's stance, which I was shocked because that's usually not what you see.
Yeah, assuming it's not some bot farm from the government or whatever. I don't
no,
know
but this was like, you could tell it was very
people.
like and some people wrote long response. Other people were just like, "You guys are idiots." So it was like a real variety of responses.
I mean, I've tried to find naysayers in Zonte. I've always been a bit bad about it. I've almost tried to put words in people's mouths and be like, "Did you not find that the price is going up? It's been really horrible." They're like, "No, I think it's just a sign that people are interested in here." And I'm like, "Okay, fair. What about you? Like, are you planning on selling?" They're like, "No." Have you got your property valued? They're like, "No." And then you forget as well that this is a sleepy surf town where everyone gets up at 6 a.m. and goes to bed at 9, and like they're in tune with nature, and the sounds are amazing, the lights, the colors are fantastic. It's just a very different way of living and a different approach to the planet than it is in cities and that kind of thing. So yeah, I've been trying, and I've actually been struggling, and so you fall back on sort of the old tropes and these poorly researched hit pieces, as opposed to generally telling the full picture.
And there's things even I don't like. Like I was disappointed that they allowed them to build the towers, the condo towers that they're building. Not because I'm anti-development, but I just feel like it's out of character.
It really is.
Zonte.
And you've got these lovely sloped huts and the eco suites that are being built now. By the way, they're being turned around by next week. I was talking to the construction workers, and I was like, "What?" They're all just like hammering away, and they're like, "Yeah, it's going to be done next week." I was like, "Bro, really?" But
But yeah, so some of the I wish they would have kept some of the height restrictions and some of the other things just to keep the character. But it's not up to me, and it's not and
as
so
says, it's Malibu, so it's going to go big. Let's completely change gears. Let's do a lightning round. So I'm doing this with all the interviews at the moment, and they're really quick questions. First thing comes into your head. So, can pineapple go on a pizza?
Yes.
Interesting. What will Bitcoin price hit during this bull run?
1 Bitcoin will equal 1 Bitcoin.
Classic. Bits, sats, or Bitcoins?
Sats.
There was a little bit of reluctance though. What would you ask Satoshi Nakamoto if you could?
I'd be curious if he's happy with the direction that everything's taken.
Nice. What's one thing Bitcoiners need to do better as a community?
Spin Bitcoin.
Nice. What's your favorite Bitcoin meme, if you have one?
I think just 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin.
Yeah, refer to previous answer. If you weren't working on Bitcoin, what would you be doing?
Surfing a lot more.
Yeah, when are you in the water, Mike?
Never.
Why?
It's ridiculous. There's always meetings or things going on, and it's dumb. I'm gonna stop it this year. I have a couple more weeks that of busy schedule, and then I'm gonna like just start saying no to things so I can surf. So,
dude, like honestly, I mean, you know, the drone shot of your podcast when it comes up here, I didn't realize that was actually the thing. I was like, that's a cool shot, like, you know, and then I was like, oh my God, that's literally where the studio is. Like, you know, we step outside, you see the sea.
Yeah.
It's just, you are on the beach. It's very, very cool. And, you know, you've got a perfect point break. You've got a perfect beach break, literally 2 seconds away from you.
Yeah. I don't know, Paco, do we still have the camera view? Do you have access to that, to pop that up on the screen? That we had an idea to put a video, like to be able to like make it look like you're looking out the window of the thing. So I don't know. We haven't actually used it on our podcast, but we'll see if Paco can pull it up.
You can test it on mine.
Yeah.
Feel free.
So go ahead and keep asking me questions. We'll see if he can.
Okay, super.
If he can get it.
Okay, we've done the lightning round. We've definitely talked about gentrification, talked about El Zonte and like the history and the change at the place here. I want to talk about the big topic of the moment, which is the IMF.
There we go.
And their repeal.
That's live camera.
Beautiful. Yeah, isn't that relaxing?
Yeah.
So that's where I grazed my knee this morning. So the IMF, of course, has come in and they've made a deal with Bukele. They're going to get a couple of $1 billion or whatever the total is now. It's probably going to increase. And within that, there's the quid pro quo was that the IMF or El Salvador will slowly sort of tone down these Bitcoin legal tender laws so that only sort of private businesses can accept it if they want to. But, you know, the state businesses, who cares, whether it's taxes or, you know, internal things. From my own investigations, I don't think the legal tender law was ever properly informed. It was certainly never punished. You know, Article 7 stated that businesses must accept Bitcoin, or should accept Bitcoin rather. Yeah. And yet no one really followed through on it. No policeman was walking into a little, you know, cafe or a pupusa cellar and being like, hello, do you accept Bitcoin?
Well, even in the way they wrote it, it was like, unless you're unable to for some reason. Like,
yes. Like, I don't know what Bitcoin is, or I've never heard of it before until today. So is that a fair assessment of how things are currently? I know we've touched on what Bitcoin is like, but like within the context of payments, like how would you evaluate the Bitcoin sort of adoption as payments right now?
So it's been interesting with the IMF thing because for me, it was like a non-story and like a brilliant move by Bukele, but I've been shocked at how many Bitcoiners and people I respect that are very, very upset, that are very disappointed, that are disillusioned, like, and even some that are like, you know, El Salvador is dead to me now. Like it's, so I think that it's important to for people to understand a few things. So one, Bukele came into this situation with debts that had been accrued by prior administrations, a lot of them who had actually stolen the money for themselves, and including one who recently died in Nicaragua that you know was reported that left with like literally trash bags full of cash when he fled to Nicaragua. And so there was a lot of mismanagement and a lot of theft and a lot of just cronyism but put El Salvador in a very bad debt situation. In fact, everybody thought that they would have defaulted by now. You know, if you go back 5 or 6 years, like in 18, 19, everybody here, especially like the business community here, is like, no, El Salvador is going to default on their dets. And it's going to destroy the economy. And it's
anyway, you know, the IMF would have bailed them out in 2018, 2019.
So there was. Bukele's been working very hard to kind of right that ship. So they've actually brought the current spending where there's no like current deficit. They're spending what they're bringing in tax revenue. They've significantly increased the tax revenue. Like even, I think it was Bank of America wrote a report that they've never seen a country increase the tax revenue so much without increasing taxes. So they didn't raise the taxes at all. They just, like the compliance with the taxes went up as the wealthy here realized they weren't going to just get a pass. In the past, they just did whatever they want because they controlled the politicians. So now the wealthy families are like, okay, we don't control the politicians anymore, so we have to pay our taxes.
So it went from informal to formal, quite like, you know.
Yeah, and just where before they just wouldn't pay them. They would hide the funds and, you know, so that was one aspect. Also just the economy is booming, and so you have a lot of more tax revenue coming in. So the amount of tax revenue they brought in, so they were able to kind of balance the current budget, but they still have all these past debts that they have to deal with. Okay. And so this deal with the IMF was something that needed to happen in order to kind of put this on a long-term sustainable platform for them to be able to pay back these debts that were, you know, most of them accrued by prior administrations. Some of them came during COVID when, and obviously the economy was shut down and there was a lot of impacts from that, but most of them were from the past. So what Bukele did is he kind of really played chicken with the IMF and was like, no, we're not going to do this deal, because they wanted them to totally renounce Bitcoin, and they thought they had him on the ropes, especially when Bitcoin was in a bear market, and they thought that they would be able to kind of really push, put the screws to him. And he bided his time, waited for Bitcoin to be obviously in a bull market, for his Bitcoin purchases to look very smart, also for Trump to be in power in the U.S., because the U.S. really, they are the biggest influence on the IMF. And so he was waiting for, there was a, administration in the U.S. that would be more favorable. And he cut a deal at the time where everything was in his favor. And so they gave the IMF, from this is my perspective, things that were kind of throwaway things that allowed the IMF to save face and be able to say they got concessions from El Salvador. So one of them was, hey, we're not going to require businesses to accept Bitcoin. Well, they hadn't been. So it was, in reality, is like nothing changed on that front. The other was that they weren't going to receive tax revenue in Bitcoin. I don't think that was ever facilitated. The government's trying to do so many different things. With the crime and economic development, all of these things. And so I don't even know if they ever got around to setting up their system to accept payments. Because I tried to, with some property purchases and stuff, I was never able to do it. I was able to pay the lawyer in Bitcoin, and then they paid it, but it wasn't able to be directly. So I don't think that was even in play. And so these were things that,
it's also the last thing a Bitcoiner wants to spend Bitcoin on is paying their taxes in Bitcoin. You know what I mean? Who is cheering on that?
Well, but it does just make it easier.
True.
It's just from a convenience standpoint. And,
it does fix
and
that.
if you're paying it to a government that's actually trying to move to a Bitcoin standard, you feel a little bit better about it. So these were things that, to me, this is small potatoes. And so the other thing was with this from talking to people with sovereign wealth funds, and what they've told me is most of these funds can't invest in the private sector in countries that are below a triple B rating.
Okay.
And so with this deal with the IMF, it kind of stabilized. The credit rating of El Salvador has been going up. I'm not sure where it's at right now, but it's been on the upswing. And so this kind of solidified that. The package with the IMF also opened up some other credit lines. And so it's allowed a lot of things that will have long-term positive impact. I'm very anti-IMF. I feel like it's, for the most part, it's done much more harm than good in the world. And so I definitely, if people want to say I'm an IMF supporter because I think that him doing a deal with them was a wise thing, then fine. But overall, I think his goal is to get them out of his hair so he doesn't have to deal with them anymore. But you also have to be realistic about the hand you've been dealt. So the other option would be to default, but that has all of these ripple effects and really would have thrown the economy into chaos. And so, and especially since he has a plan to, some governments just have to do that because they have no trajectory forward to actually dig themselves out. El Salvador's on the upswing. So do you really want to throw them into some deep recession when they have all these things, when they're firing on all cylinders? So I think it was a wise move,
But you'd think that with being an IMF lover.
Yes. So that's because I'm an IMF apologist.
Yes. So Fitch and S&P, I literally just quickly Googled it, upgraded El Salvador to a B with a stable outlook in late 2024 and 2025. So it's really impressive given that when Bukele came into power, it was C something. It wasn't. Yeah,
and the bonds were trading at some of the ones when you went out a few years, they were trading at 30 cents on the dollar. Was, and now El Salvadoran bonds have been the best bond performers in the world over the last couple of years. So
I guess sovereign wealth funds means more investment, more massive infrastructure.
More opportunity, and you need investment in a country. El Salvador is a poor country. So you need very easy to see. That investment to come in, and they're trying to set the stage that this is a welcoming place for an investment, that investors will get return on their investment, that this will be a place where they want to have a long-term plan. And so sometimes you have to be pragmatic about things.
Yeah, so Bukele's playing chess with the IMF.
Yes.
And yet at the same time, the optics of it, you mentioned this disillusionment and this general sort of outrage and emotional outpouring about this is the death of Bitcoin country. I mean, I'm working on a YouTube title right now, which is, did the IMF just kill Bitcoin in El Salvador? The question is obviously very clickbaity.
Yeah.
It hasn't. And that's my conclusion as well during the video. But my thesis is, payments were never really a thing anyway, other than these hyper-localized, hyper-Bitcoinized places, such as Bitcoin Beach.
And that continues to grow. Like,
Exactly.
It's not, even with this thing with the IMF, like, since they've made that, the number of places you can pay in El Salvador has grown, not shrunk. And that's because people want to pay in Bitcoin. The user experience continues to improve. The companies that are in the space that just make it easy, there's more and more. And so it's actually, payments are expanding, not decreasing.
I mean, Peter Schiff was trying to dunk on El Salvador yesterday by saying that payments has failed in El Salvador because it's only 8% merchant use or something. And I was like, bro, that's 7.999% higher than every other country in the world. Like, that is
and much faster than credit cards. Like,
and it banks the unbanked and does all these wonderful things. But the optics, like how, you're saying that people maybe people that were looking at buying real estate in El Salvador are now suddenly getting cold feet. Do you think this could be a slowdown in the influx of these Bitcoiners?
I'm sure there's some, but I think it'll be like a small blip compared to, and generally the people who are in position to buy property have a little more nuanced understanding of the way economies work and understand that hey, we want to buy property in a place that the president's not going to tank the economy, needlessly. And so I think most of them are going to understand that, yes, this is actually makes it a better place to invest.
Okay. I wonder whether the IMF has also pressured El Salvador into slowing down its purchases of Bitcoin, because since that law change, it wasn't the regular 1 Bitcoin a day. It was big smash buys of 11 BTC, which makes me wonder whether they may be panic buying because they know that the IMF at some point, as part of this deal, has said, you need to wind down those Bitcoin purchases, bro, because that's also something that we just don't agree with, and we're obviously completely polar opposites to. Is that something you're aware of or thinking about?
To be honest, like, and this will be a very unpopular thing to say, like, the Salvadoran government's purchases of Bitcoin was never like that big of a deal to me. Like, I don't find that.
Also, who has the keys?
That important.
Like, who has the keys? Because what happens when Bukele has to resign not resign, when he has to change power in 2 or 3 years' time? Who's going to have the keys?
that I'm not sure of. I mean, I know they've made the address is public and you can verify that the Bitcoin's actually there. But the strategic reserve, I think it makes some sense for especially if countries are going to have some reserve, Bitcoin makes the most sense. But I don't think just buying Bitcoin and hodling it that's not where the benefit comes to El Salvador. The benefit that's come to El Salvador has been how it's just transformed the image of El Salvador. It's brought capital, it's brought businesses, it's brought tourism in. El Salvador was the second fastest growing tourism market this last year in the world.
Really?
The only one that was higher. It was the only one that was higher.
Like
and it might have been the year before. I don't know when the reference thing, but the only one that was higher was Qatar. But that was during the time that they had the World Cup there. So you have all these like second and third order impacts of Bitcoin adoption that the naysayers would say, well, that's not Bitcoin. That's because Bukele's made the place safer. It's like, well, yeah, that plays a role, but there's lots of safe countries in the world that nobody wants to go and visit. Like, just because you don't see anybody, like, their tourism motto is like, come visit us because we're safe.
I can't wait to go to Cyprus. Yeah.
So it's like, so they don't understand like the Bitcoin, how it's driven all these things, how it's driven the media cycle. Even a lot of these hit pieces that are written about it show the beautiful beaches. They show, the interviews with the warm, loving people. And so, that drives tourism, even though the goal of the article was to make El Salvador look bad. It makes it look like, oh, I'd like to go visit there.
Okay.
So I think the strategic reserve is a minor player in this whole thing. Now, that said, I think it's within the IMF's right. If you're going to loan somebody money, you can put stipulations on what they can use that money for. And so I could see them saying, we don't want to give you money, and you turn around and buy Bitcoin with it. I wouldn't. be surprised that once they actually get the money, that's what they do, just to kind of thumb their nose at them. But I understand like kind of some of the reasoning behind that. But they've actually bought more since then.
Yeah, substantially more. Yeah.
Probably some of that was just to like show Bitcoiners like, hey, we're not turning our back on
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. And so I think that they kind of understand that public perception. So a lot of it was probably just to like reassure people.
Okay.
But like I said, for me, the whole talk about strategic reserve, whether it's here or the US or anywhere, I feel like it's just a big distraction from the real benefits and use cases for Bitcoin. And so I don't really care that much.
Okay. I mean, you kind of touched on this already, but do you see any risk of government backtracking on Bitcoin adoption? And within that, I guess, is the momentum already too strong? Like you were all concerned managing Bitcoin Beach and like seeing Berlin. And is there any risk that in 5 years' time, or maybe in 2 years' time, let's say, they decide to they'll put a capital gain tax on Bitcoin, for example, that would threaten to kill Bitcoin adoption. So that's just the easiest lever a government can pull is you either ban it or you don't even need to ban it. I think you just put a big capital gains tax on Bitcoin.
Yeah. No, that I would be concerned about.
Okay.
But I don't see that coming. You're not going to kill the golden goose. Like they know, they're smart enough to realize that all the benefit of all the Bitcoiners coming in from around the world of the tourism of all these things, they're not gonna torpedo that for no reason, and it wouldn't bring that much revenue in anyway. Right. So it would be a very stupid thing for them to do, and they're a government that I think kind of looks long term and really understands the importance of narrative and just the animal spirits in a population and how that drives things, and so they're not going to do anything to quench that. So yeah, no, I don't have any concerns about them backtracking. If I was concerned when they had made big purchases early on and the Bitcoin price tanked and there was all these hit pieces talking about how, they gambled all this money and they've lost and they just kept doubling down. Yeah. So if they're not going to backtrack at that point, why are they going to backtrack when they're winning?
Good point. Okay, and let's take the anarchist view then. Is there an argument to be made that perhaps this IMF repeal of the laws is good because it means that the government is less and less interested and less involved in the actual running of Bitcoin within the country? There's going to be they're fading out the use of Chivo, which, let's be honest, is the crappiest wallet in the world. It's basically like a weird pseudo CBDC. So yeah, could the IMF actually be a good thing? Can we make that case?
Yeah, I mean, I made that case on Twitter when this came out. I was like,
oh, I didn't see that. Sorry.
Yeah, I was like, Bukele, this was like a gift to him to unload this dog that they had. The Chivo thing has really been a huge detriment, I think. I mean, I understand the logic of them wanting to do it initially, and I think, and I'm sympathetic to what some of the goals were, but I think it's really been holding them back, and I think for them, this was a gift because now they can say, well, we had to let this go. Where otherwise, if they did anything, they'd be admitting that what a disaster it was. So this was kind of an easy out for them to get rid of Chivo and not have that hanging around their neck, but blame it on the IMF. So yeah, I think the IMF gave him a gift.
He is a master marketer and manipulator, isn't he, Bukele? He honestly, the way he sees the world, it's so intelligent, and so the way in which he plays people off each other and plays institutions off each other.
You watch him play the U.S. and China off each other. Yeah. You watch him,
Oh, on China, by the way. So a lot of Bitcoiners don't know that China has donated a metric fuck ton of projects to El Salvador, whether it's the library, the new stadium, various infrastructure projects within San Salvador. And it's funny because, obviously El Salvador has just said that, Taiwan belongs to China, so that they get this money and these donations. But there's a massive China flag in front of the library, which a lot of Bitcoiners just don't seem to understand. So I went to the library the other day and I was like, okay, has China also exported its ideology? Therefore, can you find Winnie the Pooh in the library? Can you find Tiananmen Square in the library? And there wasn't a copy of Winnie the Pooh, but it could just be that the kid has defaced it, or, kids have been kids, right?
Yeah.
But there was a reference to Tiananmen Square in a couple of history books. There wasn't a book on student protests in 1989 in China. However, there was, these references. And then I also found lots of copies of 1984 by George Orwell, which is one of the many books that is banned in China. So I think that, he's able to take this money, look at the strings attached and find a way to sort of circumvent them and then build up his country as well. It's I know that I'm really simping hard over this guy right now, which is not the done thing. But as you can't help but wonder if lots of politicians around the world are looking at this guy and going, crap, what is the Bukele playbook? What is the strategy here? How has he managed to turn so many metrics from some of the worst in the world to some of the best in the world, or at least in their hemisphere? So it's really a fascinating story to follow. And obviously, this leads to this atmosphere of hope and optimism and whatnot here.
No, he's very pragmatic, and I think does what's best for his people. Obviously, I'm not a fan of China, making inroads in this part of the world, and I think there's a lot of dangers. But I think he has. I'm not concerned about El Salvador because I feel like he has a handle on it, and he's just used it to keep the U.S. on their toes. In the U.S., when Biden came in, they had a lady, I can't remember her name, but she was like the temporary charge d'affaires, which is like the temporary ambassador, and she just went hardcore after Bukele and it was embarrassing to see somebody go after the democratically elected ruler of the country in the way that she did. And the Bukele administration basically just cut the U.S. off. Like,
really?
Yeah. I mean, I've got friends at the U.S. Embassy, and they were like freaked out. They're like, we've never had this before. Like, they won't return our calls. We have no idea what's going on. The U.S. is used to running things in El Salvador. Yeah. So they were like, and so they brought somebody else in as ambassador, and he's been trying to repair the relationship, and I think things are on okay now. But you've seen even since Trump has been elected that it's going to be a whole different thing. That Trump and Bukele always had like a good relationship before. The ambassador that was here under Trump, I think it was Ron Johnson, I believe his name, was him and Bukele were on very good terms, and so I think whoever comes in next, I think you'll see the U.S. Salvadoran relationship. I think that's very important, and I think China will kind of get faded back out of the picture.
Okay. Interesting. And then within this, you've got the Tether entrance into El Salvador. Paolo Arduino, the CEO of Tether, great guy, obviously Bitcoiner. He has now got Salvador in residence. He's bought a couple of properties here. His co-manager was Davasini.
He's got a Salvadoran passport.
He's got a Salvadoran passport. Oh, so you can buy a passport.
It was in the Alfaro. I'm not outing him because it was in the Alfaro article. But right.
That means you can also buy passports through residence, through investment here, as you can in lots of countries around the world. But he's also managing to get into bed with Tether while also, I don't know what's going on there, but obviously Tether behind Plan B Network, which had this big conference this January. They're going to repeat it next year as well. They're building the Tether Tower, which is going to be this giant tower near the Google Tower, I imagine, in the San Benito area of El Salvador. And this happens at the same time that the IMF repeals this legal tender law. So are we seeing a future in which Tether is going to be working alongside Bitcoin in El Salvador? Is this the direction that things are going? What's your take?
Yeah, I think it's remarkable. You look at Tether. What was their profits last year? Was like
$10.5 billion.
I think it was 11. Like 13 billion, wasn't it?
Let's double check.
Let's double check. Whether it was 9.5 or 13, it was like significantly more than all of the tax revenue in El Salvador for the year. So you have one country that makes more in profits.
13 billion. Yeah.
It was what?
13 billion.
13 billion. Yeah. So I think the tax revenue in El Salvador, if I'm remembering right, it's about 7 billion a year.
Okay. Yeah.
So you have this company that makes basically twice that has moved their global headquarters to El Salvador.
Yeah.
And so I think people underestimate just what a big impact that this will have longer term and what a long tail it will have as far as other companies that it sucks in. When you have a behemoth like Tether that's located here, and they have obviously big plans for El Salvador. They want to set this up as like the financial center of Latin America with capital markets. People can, where companies can raise in a way that's much cheaper than trying to raise in the U.S.
There's already the Bitfinex securities, and obviously Tether and Bitfinex are peas in a pod.
Yes. There's a very incestuous relationship there between them and Plan B, and they just like, it's all one big conglomerate.
I mean, you can say the same thing about me, right?
Yes.
Plan B
well, you're a shill. You're a shill for Tether.
Yeah. Tether's a shitcoin, everyone. Surprise, surprise, Tether's a shitcoin.
You're a Tether shill.
It's what I loved about Paolo at the conference the other day. You know, there was someone that was like picketing, and he was trying to stop people going into the main stage when Paolo was giving a talk about Tether, and he was like, guys, Tether's a shitcoin. Like, you know, Tether's like in bed with the US or whatever it was. He's like just chatting some stuff, which you often see banded around on Twitter. And then like Paolo, this is hearsay by the way, I don't know for sure, but Paolo got wind of it and was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, but he is right, you know, Tether is a shitcoin. Yeah. It's like everything that isn't Bitcoin is a shitcoin. Yep. And that's the CEO of this damn company, you know, and he's saying Tether is a shitcoin, and it's because he's a Bitcoiner. And lots of
he'll say he wants to obsolete Tether longer term. Like that's the goal.
He says that Tether is only so successful because the incumbent financial system is so damn poor.
Yeah.
Like, it's a really funny thing that they have this cash cow, you know, the most profitable company per capita in the world, and yet they really care about the future of Bitcoin. So I think that's the thing that people just can't hold those two ideas in their head at the same time. And, you know, once they hang out with some of these guys and realize the work they're doing for Bitcoin, it's like, yeah.
No, I mean, you know, and obviously I think Tether, like any company or government or whatever, there's going to be mix of views and different people that pull the strings. But you know, I know Paolo fairly well, and he's a real legitimate Bitcoiner. Like he cares about freedom.
He's great.
Even the things with Keaton, Hole Punch, and the other things that they're putting their funds behind, like it's freedom tech. That's what they're about. And so I think it's positive, and they'll admit, you know, they'll say the same thing. Like, yeah, it is a shitcoin. It's tied to the dollar long term. We don't want that we want to obsolete it. What other company would want to obsolete their cash cow?
Yes, and by extension, though, because Tether is so successful and because it is, in a way, a better version of the dollar in the way that it's like less discriminatory, you can transfer it over borders easier, it's just easier to use, more portable. Does that not like extend the life of the dollar, which is obviously what we don't want to do as Bitcoiners, because it's all about, you know, creating a peer-to-peer cash system that anyone can use, and it's, you know, separating your money from states. So by Tether being so successful, is it also inadvertently shooting ourselves in the foot, keeping the dollar hegemony going longer and longer?
See, I have a little bit different theory, and it's the same reason that I had predicted that El Salvador would be the first country to adopt the Bitcoin.
Okay.
I think once countries move away from printing their own currency, they're much more open to Bitcoin. And so the reason, you know, when I started pushing that El Salvador would be the first, everybody's like, oh, you're an idiot. They already have the dollar, so they're not worried about inflation. Argentina will be the first, or, you know, Venezuela. And it was like, no, actually, in those countries, the officials benefit because they always have access to privileged rates for exchange. And so they're always getting rich off of these kind of dual exchange rates that exist. But El Salvador has already given that up. They have nothing to lose. And so that was why I felt very strongly that, and now people say like, oh, that was obvious. But at the time, everybody said I was an idiot because they're like, well, they already have the dollar. Why would they need Bitcoin? So I think we're going to see the same thing globally. I think because of stable coins, you'll see more countries give up on their own currency, because in the past they could kind of keep them out with exchange controls and all these things. But now that everything's digital, it's going to be very hard to keep people from just going to a digital dollar. So I think countries will go to a digital dollar. They'll stop printing their own currencies. So you'll have less, you know, I think 20 years from now, there will be a lot less different fiat currencies. I think there'll still be some of the bigger ones, but a lot of the smaller ones will go away, and those countries will all dollarize. Well, that will make them much more open to, well, if we've given up our currency and our printing press, we might as well go to Bitcoin rather than subsidizing the US's printing press. So I actually think it will hasten the adoption of Bitcoin longer term.
Okay.
But in a two-step process, dollarization, then Bitcoin.
Yes, and there are like 13 countries worldwide that are sort of de facto dollar, out of which like 8 generally use the dollar, like lots of islands and things. So.
Yeah, something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but I know like Panama, Ecuador, and there's some like smaller island nations. Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, where was I going with this again? That was it. So Bitcoin is de facto legal tender in El Salvador, but it's not like official legal tender anymore. So do we see?
Well, even that's like a broad, like when you ask people what's the definition of legal tender, like, you know, it's
de facto is like, you know, because it's 0% capital gain, so you can just use it freely, right?
But even like there's states, you know, there's many states in the U.S. of the passed legal tender laws for gold and silver, but there's still businesses aren't forced to accept gold and silver so there's no one definition for what even legal tender means. Usually it means like a currency that legally you can pay your debts in.
Yeah.
But even the way that's acted, there's lots of people that can't pay their debts in gold and silver, even in these states that have adopted, gold and silver as legal tender. So it's kind of this like,
Yeah, it's very hard to just put your finger on it and be like, yes, 2 + 2 equals legal tender. Yeah, okay. So, there's that town in Brazil, right, that actually uses gold as finance, as currency, as medium of exchange.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's like, because it's near the gold mines. And I've always wanted to go there, but it's like way off the beaten track in the middle of the Amazon. But the idea is to go there and do like, this is a gold circular economy, and like riff on it about Bitcoin circular economies. But yeah, does Tether's ingratiating within the political structure here? Paolo's meeting with Naib, and they're building this tower, and they're hosting these conferences, and they're doing lots of press stuff, and they're buying influence. Does this pave the way to Bitcoin not being legal tender, but Tether becoming legal tender in El Salvador within, say, Bukele's presidency? Is this the direction that it could go?
I don't think so. And I think ironically, because El Salvador was already dollarized, Tether is used less in El Salvador than probably any other country in Latin America.
Yeah, true.
You see you never hear of Tether being used here. So, in fact, I remember asking Paolo about that a couple of years ago in Lugano, and he's like, we don't want to bring Tether to El Salvador because we feel like it'll kind of cloud the Bitcoin adoption and that kind of narrative. So that's not saying they can't change their mind longer term, but yeah, I don't feel like they're at all trying to push Tether in here. I think as far as the unit of account or the currency, I think they want Bitcoin to remain that.
Actually, a good point about that is that the Lugano conference, you can pay in Bitcoin and Tether at all of the vendors, right?
Yeah.
That's their big thing. Here, it was only Bitcoin.
Yeah.
All of the merchants had to be onboarded into Bitcoin. That was the one stipulation for them to sell products out the conference. It was you had to accept Bitcoin. So they didn't push the Tether thing there.
I think there might have been a few that took Tether that were using they're tied in with, what is it?
The Lugano, either
Naka thing. So, but that was actually one of the things that came up for discussion, because originally there was like, well, we're going to everybody use Naka, and we were like, no, we don't think that's going to be a good experience for people. And so they were like, yeah, you guys are right. We'll just make sure that everybody takes Bitcoin. So I don't feel like they have that agenda.
Yeah. No, I think that's important to note. And yeah, because the Naka thing is also just so slow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's what I told him. I had such a bad experience in Lugano. We tried to pay for our pizza, and it was like, we couldn't. Like literally, we wound up having to pay with credit card because it kept failing.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, this was the day before the conference started. I was like,
yeah, that payment solution does suck. And they know it sucks, but they also just don't want to replace this giant thing that they've spent years and a lot of time and business partnerships investing in. And it's just another symptom of like this brand new economy that's being built. There's going to be a lot of failures. There's going to be a lot of experimentation and working out what sticks to the wall and what doesn't.
And I also don't get why they did a token in Lugano, the Lugano token.
Oh, I know the stories behind that. So So just before the pandemic, they created the city token thing. The idea was to incentivize people to spend money locally. So it's a token that only means something in the walls of Lugano, which, as you know, is a tiny city. And so you can only use it if you're a resident. So you have to KYC to use it. And the idea is that you get like a discount by spending money locally. So to try and get people to, use money locally. And on top of that, they built this sort of Bitcoin Tether and Luga thing. So I got gifted Luga tokens for completing the Plan B summer school like 2 years ago, which is like this Bitcoin school. You spend 2 weeks there. And the second you leave Lugano, it's worthless. So, also, did I have to KYC? I don't think I had to KYC for it or anything. But it's not even a shitcoin. It's just like a Starbucks points or whatever you call it. It's and it was just there because it was already existing. And I think that was their they used it as a doorway to get
Bitcoin and Tether into.
But as we just discussed, the actual POS devices there, they suck. You can live on Bitcoin easily in Lugano. You can buy real estate. Like I tried to buy a 16 million franc ocean Lakeview property. They laughed me out the office, obviously. And I tried to buy a Lamborghini, like the big Lamborghini. I don't know anything about cars, but the bigger ones. And it was like 380,000 francs. And again, I was like, how do you actually pay for that? And he's like, because those NACA payment things have a limit of 100,000. So you do 3 lots of 100,000 and 84,000. Otherwise, you have to KYC more. So it's kind of cool in a way. You should just do an on-chain. But anyway, we're getting distracted by Lugano. Back to El Salvador. So Tether, obviously investing a lot. Can we talk about some of those big projects that you're exploring right now that are on the sort of near horizon?
Yeah.
Like what were you up to yesterday?
Yesterday we were in a meeting with the folks from Wave Garden, which is a wave park developer out of Spain, I believe, was presenting with the Minister of Tourism and with a number of developers in El Salvador that they, and I've been pushing on this for a couple of years, so I was excited. Like, El Salvador needs a big wave park because it'll drive a ton of tourism. It's the best location for it because it's warm year round. So, a lot of the ones, even like Kelly Slater one they has in California has an awesome wave, but it's freezing in the winter. Like, I had friends that went there. No, but you have to wear booties and a hood and like the, 4 or 5 wetsuit. And it's like, I'm too fat and out of shape to try to get up if I have to put a wetsuit on. So I'm like, El Salvador has like warm weather year round. You could surf 24 hours here with no wetsuit. It's also like this hub that's very easy for people to fly from Canada, from the US, from Brazil, like all over. It's central. And so them having like a real premier wave park here would bring literally hundreds of thousands of additional tourists in, and it would really cement, they've been working so hard to make this like the premier surf destination. So bringing a wave park would be huge. And so I've been pushing on this for a couple of years, so I feel like it's gaining some momentum. We actually have a call with another company later today with Surf Lakes to see what kind of thing technology they have. Cool. These are expensive projects, and so
they are energy guzzlers.
Well, I was surprised the one that the one that they're presenting yesterday, they said that it uses like $60 of electricity a day.
You're
like
kidding?
I was like shocked at
in
how,
Texas, surely. No. In the UK, I think it's probably £600 a day or something.
No, but they're based all over in Europe too. So they must. Right. They said the way that their technology works, it doesn't use nearly as much energy as some of these other ones. So
I think I'd have to see it to believe that, because even when you look at these, like it's a huge, like people that don't know what a wave park is, it's a huge, like a mini lake effectively. Yeah. And then depending on the technology used, like you mentioned the one in Australia that has the bomb,
the big plunger. Yeah,
so they drop this sort of like giant anvil into the middle of this lake, and it creates this circular wave all around. It's quite like a physical sort of feat.
Yeah.
And then there's one in Wales in the UK, and that one they drag it looks kind of like a spade through a water, and it creates 2 separate waves. That one's very energy inefficient, and it's built next to what used to be an old smelting plant.
Okay.
So obviously
they have cheap energy there.
Cheap energy, and also a lot of it's renewable because it was from a hydropower, but they just pumped water up and down the hills. It was like Snowdonia, which is Wales's tallest mountain. And then there's one in Bristol, which they say a lot of it's solar power. But dude, it's the UK. Like, it's absolutely not. It's coming from the grid. But these are really profitable, and they're really they build a community around them very quickly, because you go for a surf, then you have a coffee. You let your kids do this small like wave thing as well, and people learn to swim for it, and that's really important because lots of Salvadorans don't know how to swim, and like people forget that as well. Like a lot of the
and it's a safe environment to learn to surf. You don't have the currents and the other things that you have
like
in
the
other
jellyfish
places.
or like the rocks or all these things. So it's a really, really cool invention. And it's part of that. If you want to be a true surf premier destination, you have to also have like this wave pool thing now as well. So is there a world in which you see these wave pools starting, and also you have the Bitcoin mining on alongside it to sort of get those the duck curve of the energy generation, or overnight, for example?
Yeah, no, I think that there's tons of possibilities for that, to kind of coordinate those two things. But I also just think, as far as like just driving, the biggest thing I would want to see is this be a place where you only spend Bitcoin, like everything's denominated.
Each wave is 20 sats.
where it's Bitcoin only. So you bring these surfers in from around the world that want this opportunity, and they have to onboard the Bitcoin to be able to do that. So cool. I mean, I think Bitcoin Beach is a good name for the wave park. So,
sick. Yeah.
But it would be, I think it would be great for tourism. It would be great for Bitcoin because it'd bring much more publicity to it. It'd be great for El Salvador. Mm-hmm. If only we knew of a company that was very profitable and that had a lot of money to invest.
And they're already like friends with the government.
Yeah, and they're very involved in El Salvador.
Yeah.
I'll have to think about that and see if we can.
Oh my God, this is becoming like a Tether Shield podcast. Tether, buy this wave pool, like
Yes.
build it, you know. You don't need to put.
You get naming rights, you get everything.
Yeah.
Let's make this Bitcoin wave park happen.
Yeah, the Bitcoin Tether wave. Or something, I don't know. But no, it's very, very cool. Is there anything else you want to say on Tether? I've got one last sort of topic of conversation I wanted to address today.
No, I think we covered that.
Yeah. It's. I think a lot of the conspiratorial stuff around Tether is quite poorly researched ultimately.
Well, I feel like that's all crumbled recently.
Yeah,
I feel like, I mean,
well, there's the whole like, oh, they're in bed with the US government and therefore it's going to, I don't even know what the dark thing is, because like we already know the dollar is dark, and like, we already know that the US's biggest export is inflation, and like the US military industrial complex must continue. All this stuff that we all know intrinsically, but then the thing that a lot of the people and Bitcoiners miss about Tether is that Tether never ever goes to the US.
Yeah.
What does that tell you about Tether? Like, I'm never going back to Cuba. Why am I never going back to Cuba? Because I know that I'll have a car accident, or I'll end up in hospital for something, you know? Because that's why I don't go back to Cuba. And Tether, like even, you know, when the HODLing meeting took place, where did it take place? In San Salvador.
Yeah.
They're not going to the US, so they're not mates. I'm sorry, but they're not, you know, or at least this is my interpretation of this whole thing. And I think it's what a lot of people sort of miss from it.
I think they have done a campaign recently to try to like, okay, I think in the early days they figured they were going to get shut down at some point, and so it's just like, let's do this while we can. I think now they're like, well, maybe this is sustainable, and so let's like try not to put a target on our back with the U.S. But exactly. I definitely wouldn't say that they're in bed together.
Yeah.
The other thing was the Fed, that it was underfunded, and I don't know, maybe in the early days there was times where they didn't have all the backing, but now they're so profitable that it's just laughable to think that they don't have the backing for the amount of Tether that's out there. So the numbers just are astronomical. Okay, so circular economies globally. You had a global Bitcoin circular economy summit just before the conference. I sadly couldn't make it. It was just too expensive to change all the flights and all that. But yeah, you had economies. You're just not committed enough.
Yeah, I need to cover more circular economies. Like I'd say 2 in 3 of my videos are about circular economies. And I'm going to a circular economy today, for God's sake. I'm going to Berlin, then I'm going to Piraeus, and then I'm going to, I wanted to go to La Union, but just to make a joke about the fact that this is Bitcoin City. Yeah. And then they go to the real Bitcoin City. But yeah, so you, this is another hat that you wear, which is to sort of help support, advocate for, and mentor circular economies globally. First thing is just, how was this summit of 2 days that you hosted was it in El Zonte, or was it?
Yeah, we had it in El Zonte. It was amazing. It was, I mean, so many of the people that came, it was the first time they've ever been out of their home country.
Whoa.
And so I'm a big believer in like travel and experience as far as educating people, and these are leaders in their community. So I think just to be able to open their eyes to the possibilities for their own growth, all these things, that it's a very worthwhile investment to just get them here. But then also for them to see the way Bitcoin Beach has developed, the way Bitcoin is used, for them to be able to go to the Plan B conference and see, like, this is not just local things, but this is also global finance, and them to get an idea that, you know, for some of them, they were onboarded by a local leader, and they're like, is this just some like pipe dream, or is this? So I think it makes it just real to them to see like how big Bitcoin is and how the impact it's having around the world. But then also to meet with all the other people that are in the trenches with them, share ideas, build these friendships. So yeah, it was amazing. Roman and Deanna and Brian and Freddie, the team, they just put together a amazing itinerary. I mean, it was like chock full too. They went from like 9 to 6, just like really? I'm like, dude, that's a little much. And they're like, no, this is important. And the people hung in there, and it was like, yeah.
Poor
I
guys.
was like, yeah, they
I
were.
could barely survive a 10 till 5 conference.
Some of them were jet lagged. They just come in, from like halfway around the world, and then they're just like in the. But yeah, that they were just like eating it up, and so you could tell like they left just energized, excited. I think the impact they're going to have in their communities when they go back is going to be doubled, tripled. I mean, they just had this. They had the tools, they had the excitement, now they have the network of support around the world. Okay. Were any circular economies that sort of stood out for you? Maybe it's just something that you would never expect to happen there. I mean, like, for example, Burundi, which
let's be honest, I reckon half people listening have not heard of Burundi before. Like it's like
Yeah.
Africa's smallest like continental country, on the island of island of Africa. There's a circular economy there, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like,
There is so many now. It is hard to like keep track because they're seeing what's happened in one place, and they're like, well, hey, if they can do it there, then we can do it here. And so I think one of the ones I'm most excited about is what's happening in Uganda.
with Brendan.
Yeah, with Brendan.
He's just a legend. Yeah.
Oh man, he is so sharp. I mean, that guy is
genius. If I could buy shares in a person, I think it would be Brendan.
Yeah. So just seeing how they've kind of turned this, like an orphanage and children's home, and seeing that as the basis for a circular Bitcoin economy, and the ways that they've done it, the ways they've kind of like onboarded the different vendors of like initially saying, hey, we'll use you, but you got to move over to Bitcoin, and kind of bringing them along. So many reasons that I'm excited about that.
Have you seen Brendan dance?
No.
Oh my God.
Is he a good dancer?
Are you kidding me? I think he's the best dancer in Bitcoin. He like break dances, does backflips, all this stuff.
He's definitely, I wouldn't want to race him anywhere. I mean, that guy is
also fast,
fit,
yeah.
like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. So
also seen, so we had one of the guys from Bitcoin Akasi.
Latando or Luke?
Latando was here, but also
Luke
Mahi. That's his nickname. I can't pronounce his African name. So
is it Luke?
Yeah.
I just call him Luke.
Yeah.
I surfed with him and your son yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so cool.
So my son John became friends with him when we went over to visit Bitcoin Akasi a couple years ago. They surfed together, and so super cool having him come over. He'd never left South Africa before. And so, and he's a ripper surfer. So to have him come over and be able to surf warm water for the first time, like truly warm water.
And no sharks.
Yeah, no sharks. So I was kind of thrilling to see him and see the impact. So see just all this growth of people that, never would have dreamed that they'd have the opportunity to travel somewhere or be a part of something that was global like that, and seeing them coming in. The folks that are doing the project in Bali, just kind of understanding how they're going about doing a circular economy in a place where it's technically illegal to transact in Bitcoin, and kind of their workarounds. So there was just so many different cool projects, and seeing them connect with like the people from Berlin, the projects here, and all these kind of shared stories. And it was just great being with people from around the world. You had, all these different accents and colors and everything, kind of kaleidoscope of people and points of view, but all like passionate about Bitcoin. Yeah,
no, it's this beautiful snapshot of humanity, isn't it? And that's one thing we forget, is that there are still several countries worldwide where Bitcoin use is illegal, or Bitcoin is only considered by the government as personal property. Like China, you can only hold Bitcoin, but you're not allowed to do anything with it. On Indo, same thing.
Yeah.
You can't really do something with it. Algeria, it's completely illegal. Tunisia, like semi-illegal. And yet you're still seeing stuff happening underground in these places. And so it highlights that contrast between Zonte and, like, can you imagine these people coming from Indonesia to here and being like, God, you guys have got it easy.
Yeah. I'm sure that was in the back of their mind. They're like, of course it's worked here. You guys got everything in your favor. So.
Okay. We've been going, I don't know, it feels like an hour and a half, an hour 45. We've been going for a while, and I had a coffee and I'm desperate to pee. But I wanted to ask some sort of more personal questions. What does Bitcoin Beach look like in, say, 5 years? And within that question, like, do you think it'll be like 100% Bitcoin by that point?
Yeah, are you talking about Bitcoin Beach, like the movement, or like El Zonte and the location?
Let's stick to El Zonte, like forget the wave pool and the global impact,
I in 5 years, I'm sure there'll still be some people that are using the dollar, but I think you'll see a continued movement. I think you'll see locals continue to prefer Bitcoin, increasingly so. I think you'll see much more capital development on the local level. And I think you'll see lots of new leaders that will rise up. And hopefully most people won't know who I am, because it'll be just kind of taken over by, that's where I think it's important that you have people play a role for a time.
Yeah.
But you have new local leaders rise up and kind of push the movement forward. And I also think in 5 years it won't need as much pushing, because it'll just have this like momentum that carries it forward. And so there'll still obviously need to be the grassroots community focused efforts and all of these things. But I think they have enough momentum that they'll carry on their own. And so we've actually been able to pull back, initially all the resources, all our time, all the funds were going into stuff local, here in El Zonte. We've been able to kind of pull back from that as other people come in and like take up the mantle.
Yeah. I mean, that's something actually I hear so commonly among circular economies globally. Like you were saying that, and it echoed of what Peter Kroll in Curacao said. He was like, I just want to fade into the background at some point. Edwin in Vitsund, I don't know if these guys were here during the summit, but they were like, listen, like maybe me and a few other people, we started this thing, but it's up to the other guys to carry the torch and keep it going. So.
I think in general, I think there's a few exceptions, but in general, I feel like when Bitcoiners stay in the public space for too long, they go off the rails. So I think
derangement syndrome, right? Yeah.
I think it's good to you play your role and then you fade away and do other things in life. I mean, obviously I'm passionate about Bitcoin, but it's not the only thing I'm passionate about. And it's not, if you make your life just about Bitcoin, your life's not going to be that fulfilling.
Yeah, can you pinch me if I ever do that?
Yes.
And be like, Joe,
I'll punch you,
man? Yeah. go surf for a bit. Go play music. Do something else. And then the other thing is, like, what's a piece of advice you'd give to someone who wants to start a Bitcoin circular economy? I know I've asked you this on stage and that sort of, but it does need to be addressed. Yeah.
Like we always tell people, like this isn't something that you can just kind of do on a whim. Like you can play a different role. You can show up if you don't have the time to dedicate it to something, then go and participate in another circular economy. But if you actually want to start one, you have to be willing to live and be enmeshed in that community, to really understand what the needs are, to not come in and like push your agenda, but understand, okay, how can we actually help and meet the needs? What role does Bitcoin play in that? And just know that it's going to take years, not weeks, not months. I mean, it's going to take years to kind of really develop and leave a lasting legacy.
But are you surprised at all by the development and the pace of development? Like when you first entered Bitcoin, a little bit less than 10 years ago now, and the Bitcoin circular economy has been going for 6 years now? It started in 2019, didn't it?
Yeah, 2019, yeah.
So are you surprised at all at what you collectively have achieved here?
Yeah, it's actually gone much faster than we would have anticipated, and had much broader like impact on, obviously on the country and everything else. But that's not to say that there aren't been times where it felt like, oh my gosh, we're not making any progress, or we're going backwards, or we're slogging through the mud, especially in the early years. And so I think it's important for people to realize that, there's a lot of just grinding that needs to happen. And there'll be a lot of setbacks along the way.
Yeah, I think people forget that sometimes, don't they? They have to forget that for every podcast episode, or for every video, or every interview, or every piece of travel, it is a tiny bit of, effort, and it all accumulates. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you would have liked to have covered this morning? I know we've covered a lot, but...
We've covered a lot. Yeah.
I
think it's good. Yeah.
Sweet.
Okay. I mean, it's your podcast, so you tell me. So.
Yeah. Well, I want to see John Dennehy on your podcast, on the Live from Bitcoin Beach. And if anyone's watching at home, go subscribe to Live from Bitcoin Beach, which is obviously in this studio. I'd love to see, you two talk about like the optics of this sort of legal tender change.
Yeah.
And, he's a really thoughtful guy, and I admire him and what he does for, and, what he's doing with My First Bitcoin is really, really fundamental to Bitcoin's success here. And he's got some strong opinions on the IMF thing. So that's just like can you do that?
No. John's been on the podcast a couple times. I'm actually on the board of My First Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so, big supporters of their thing. And John and I have discussed,
I guess privately and stuff,
this issue. So I'll see, if he's willing to do it publicly.
We talked a little bit on stage at the Plan B conference, and I think I think you talk about it publicly. I think because a lot of Bitcoiners are like in New Zealand or the UK or something, and they're seeing this like, oh my god, this is like the worst thing ever, and it's like, no, it's really not. Like let me show you people that are living this experience. But we've covered Zonte, gentrification, IMF, Tether, patience. And of course, circular economies globally. So I think we can leave it there. Yeah.
We just need Tether to confirm they're going to build a surf park here, and we'll be all set.
Who would have thought we'd be shilling Tether building a surf park, but there you go. Thanks so much for watching, and I'm just going to do a quick thank you to Plan B Network, who I haven't mentioned enough during this podcast already. But Plan B Network is a free-to-use website. It is completely open. It's not quite open source, it's just a website. But you can go on there to learn about all the circular economies globally, as Plan B have a big section on that. So yeah, please check out planb.network. And the second person to thank is CoinCorner. CoinCorner is a British Bitcoin exchange based in the UK. They've been going for more than 10 years now, and they have a wonderful team. They're based out of the Isle of Man, and they are Bitcoin only, as all your things should be. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you on another one in another random studio sometime soon. Do what you love and save in Bitcoin.